My true story from Michigan. On Christmas morning, my grandson asked, "Who are you again?" His mom laughed. I didn't. That night I took my keys and the deed. I used to think that after all those years of being a mother, and later a grandmother, I would at least have a small corner to call my own on Christmas Day. Not a throne, not a pedestal, just a chair by the fire, a place at the table, a warm blanket folded with quiet dignity. But that year, there was no room for me in the house. What I had was a storage container in the backyard. No heater, no thick quilt, just the rustle of wind slipping through warped seams of cold steel and the musty scent of forgotten holiday decorations. That container had once been filled with Christmas lights, old wrapping paper, and a fake pine tree whose needles were starting to fall off. Now it held me. My daughter-in-law's voice was quiet but sharp as the wind outside. She did not whisper out of respect, only calculation. She did not want the guests to hear her. "Mom," she said, with a look that scanned me from my knit cardigan down to my wool slippers, "the house is packed. These are people from David's office, real people, people with money. And you smell like one of those witches from old fairy tales, like mothballs and menthol, disgusting. And that sweater? God." She paused, her lip curling slightly. "Please, do us a favor and stay out here for a little while, just until the party dies down." Then she closed the door. Not a slam, she was too polished for that. Just a deliberate final click. I heard the lock turn once. Not all the way, but enough to make a point. I sat there, hands clenched around the arms of my cardigan. I had knitted that sweater years ago, back when my joints still moved without complaint, and the winters did not feel so cruel. My husband loved that sweater. He used to call it the sunshine yarn because I made it during a blizzard. Outside the container, the music played from a Bluetooth speaker perched on the living room windowsill. The glow of warm gold lights danced behind sheer curtains. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. I had always loved that song. This time it made my stomach turn. I heard laughter, the clink of glasses, a woman's voice boasting about some new car with heated seats, a man making a joke about his bonus. Then, over it all, the unmistakable sound of my grandson's voice, young, innocent, confused. "Mom," he said, loud enough for the whole house to hear. "Who's that lady?" The room quieted just long enough to catch the answer. My daughter-in-law, in her calm, polished tone, the one she used for interviews and charity galas, replied, "Oh, I think she's just some neighbor dropping off a gift. Don't worry about it, sweetheart." Then came the laughter. Not cruel, not cackling, just effortless dismissal. The kind of laugh people share when something or someone no longer matters. And still, I sat there, in a steel box, in the bitter December cold of Michigan. The air was so cold, it bit into my lungs with every breath, and yet I did not move. I did not cry. I had cried once, years ago, at my husband's funeral, at the birth of my son, at the sight of my grandson's fingers curling around mine when he was sick with a fever and needed a story to sleep. Now, I just stared into the darkness. My hands trembled, not from emotion, but from frost. My cardigan was not enough. My boots were too thin. The blanket they had thrown in with me smelled of mildew. In that moment, I realized something both heartbreaking and strangely liberating. I was not part of this family. Not truly. I was a relic they tolerated when convenient, a burden they concealed when inconvenient. To my grandson, I was not grandma. I was that lady. To my son, I was not mom. I was someone he allowed to linger in the margins of his life until she embarrassed him. To my daughter-in-law, I was something to manage, to contain. How many Christmases had I made magic from nothing? Stretching a budget with coupons and leftovers, turning thrift store finds into treasures? How many times had I stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, baking cookies for fundraisers, mending broken hearts with tea and stories? And yet here I was. They had a fire crackling in the hearth. I had my breath fogging in front of me. They had eggnog and imported chocolate. I had half a granola bar in my pocket. They had music. I had silence. I looked around the dim interior. Stacked boxes labeled Xmas DC, stocks of stocks and stock decks. In the far corner, a dusty nativity scene with chipped paint. Mary's face had faded. Joseph's hand was missing. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I whispered to myself, a whisper only I could hear, "This is not where I end." Because somewhere deep in the house, under a pile of unused junk in the upstairs closet, there was a lockbox, and inside that lockbox was a piece of paper. A deed. 49%. That was still mine. They might have forgotten that. But I had not. Not anymore. I was 27 when my husband died. Lung cancer. We were living in a rented duplex just outside of Lansing, barely scraping by, and he came home one day with a cough that never left. It took him in 8 months. I was a widow before my son turned 6. There was no time to mourn properly, not with a child who still wet the bed and thought his daddy was just resting in heaven. I worked 3 jobs. Early mornings as a cashier at Meijer, middays cleaning motel rooms along I-96, and late evenings doing laundry for the nursing home 2 blocks over. I did not have the luxury of rest. My paycheck barely covered rent and groceries, but I always made sure my son had shoes without holes, a backpack with working zippers, and a birthday cake, even if it was from a box mix. I never remarried. People always assumed I was too heartbroken, too stuck in grief. The truth was, I just never found anyone worth letting into the small, chaotic world I had built. My time was for my son. All of it. I gave him everything I had, and when that was gone, I gave him what I did not. When he got into community college, I cried into a dish towel in the kitchen because I did not have the money for books. So I picked up another job. For a while, I worked night shifts at a warehouse in Battle Creek. The drive was awful in the winter, but it meant tuition got paid. When he transferred to Michigan State, I sold the only thing I had left that was mine, a tiny plot of land my daddy left me near Houghton Lake. I had always dreamed of building a cabin there someday. Instead, that money went to tuition and a used Honda so he could get to class without borrowing rides. I told myself it was the right thing to do. He graduated with honors, got a job in Grand Rapids, met his wife at a fundraiser for an animal shelter. I was proud, even though she always looked at me like I was someone who had tracked dirt onto her clean floor. When they said they wanted to buy a house and needed help with the down payment, I did not hesitate. I had been saving for decades, modest little sums, tucked away every month from every paycheck. No vacations, no new furniture, just steady discipline. That money was supposed to be my safety net in old age, my cushion. But instead, I handed it over. The house they picked was just outside of Lansing. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with enough space for a swing set. They said it was perfect for building a future. I co-signed the mortgage and handed over my savings. At the time, we agreed it would be in all 3 names, mine, my son's, and his wife's. I did not push for that. They offered. They said it would make banking easier, help with refinancing later. I told them I trusted them. I did. At the closing table, I smiled like it was the happiest day of my life. They moved in first. I joined later, after giving up my apartment. At first, it felt like a fresh start. I had my own room, and they seemed grateful. My daughter-in-law even made me tea once. But slowly, things changed. The thank yous stopped. Then came the silences, the glances exchanged across the dinner table. The nights I was not invited out for family dinners. The days I came home to find my things moved without asking. And then one day, my daughter-in-law asked me to sign some papers. She said they were just to simplify ownership, for future estate planning. I did not understand the legal terms. I was tired. I trusted them. But I did not sign everything. Call it intuition. Call it an old woman's last act of rebellion. But I kept my portion, 49% of the ownership. I did not tell them. I just quietly insisted that my name stay on one part of the deed. It was not enough to control anything. But it was enough to mean something, enough to matter, just in case. Maybe, I told myself, they will need me again one day. Maybe that's when they'll remember who I am. That thought comforted me at the time. It made me believe I still had a role in this family, that I still had value. But years passed, and that maybe never came. Instead, I became the background noise to their lives, the one who picked up toys when they were left out, the one who folded laundry no one asked her to, the one who kept the thermostat low to save them money. the one who paid the electric bill quietly every month because the auto pay failed again. My daughter-in-law began referring to me as her instead of Mom. At Thanksgiving, I was asked to sit in the den because the table's tight this year. When guests came, I was introduced as David's mom. She lives with us sometimes. I had become a ghost in the very house I had helped build. And yet I stayed. I stayed because I remembered the little boy who once slept curled up beside me during storms. I stayed because I remembered the man who once held my hand after his first heartbreak. I stayed because I thought that was what mothers did. Even as I was slowly erased, even as they built a world where I no longer belonged, I stayed. I told myself love was enough. But love, it turns out, does not pay interest. Love does not hold up in court. Love does not keep you warm in a storage container on Christmas Eve. What I had left was 49%, not of their love, not of their respect, but of the house. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to finally be heard. The day before Christmas, I woke up at 5 a.m. My joints ached from the cold, and the mattress in the container was thin, but I pushed myself up anyway. Something inside me needed to feel useful, maybe even visible. I walked slowly to the main house and let myself into the kitchen before anyone else had stirred. I pulled out the mixing bowls from the bottom cabinet and grabbed the faded recipe card from my purse. It was my mother's handwriting, yellowed with age, corners soft and curling. Butter cookies, sweet, simple, and warm. I had made them every year since my son was 5. They were his favorite. He used to call them snow circles. I mixed the flour and sugar with quiet precision, my fingers still remembering the rhythm, even if they trembled more than they used to. I shaped the dough, pressed each cookie into place, and let the scent of vanilla fill the room like it used to in the old days. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe this Christmas would be different. When they came downstairs, my son in his pressed sweater and my daughter-in-law in her designer dress, they didn't say a word. Just walked past the kitchen without even glancing at the baking sheet on the counter. I waited until the guests had arrived, until the house was full of voices and camera flashes and overpriced hors d'oeuvres. Then I carefully arranged the cookies on my mother's old porcelain serving tray, the one with the cracked handle and gold trim faded by time, and stepped into the dining room. I should have known better. The moment I entered, all eyes turned toward me, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with that look, the one people reserve for something out of place, something inconvenient. I held the tray in both hands and gave a small smile. "I made these," I said softly. "Butter cookies. David used to love them." My daughter-in-law turned, her face tight with something between disgust and embarrassment. "What are you doing?" she hissed, stepping forward. This is not a church potluck." "They're just cookies," I said, still smiling, though I felt my fingers twitch slightly. She reached out, quick, sharp, and knocked the tray from my hands. It clattered to the hardwood floor, porcelain shattering, cookies scattering across the rug like broken promises. "You want to kill my child with cholesterol?" she snapped. "Sugar, butter, and whatever other ancient poison you put in there. Jesus, are you trying to give him a heart attack?" My grandson, startled by the crash, burst into tears. My daughter-in-law scooped him up, her eyes never leaving mine. "He doesn't even know who you are," she said under her breath. "And honestly, I'm glad. God forbid he grows up thinking this is normal." Then she turned, walking away with him in her arms. Just before disappearing around the corner, I heard her mutter, more to herself than anyone else, "I swear to God, when is that old woman finally going to die?" The guests stood frozen. No one said a word. A few looked away, pretending to check their phones. One man coughed awkwardly, and I crouched down. My knees popped and my hands stung from the fall of the tray, but I reached out, piece by piece, collecting what was left of my offering. Crumbs stuck to my palm, the scent of warm butter lingered, cruel and nostalgic. I did not cry. I felt tears pressing at the back of my throat, but I swallowed them. I had learned over the years how to swallow everything: love that went unreturned, effort that went unacknowledged, pain that went unnoticed. As I gathered the broken cookies, I thought about the lockbox upstairs, the one buried behind winter coats, in the hallway closet. Inside it was a folder, and inside that folder was a deed. 49%. I had signed almost everything away, but not all. Something inside me had held onto that sliver, maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride. Maybe, deep down, I had known this day would come. And then there were the utility bills, the electricity, the gas, the property taxes, all still in my name, not because I had insisted, but because they had forgotten, because they had been too busy, too distracted, too indifferent to switch them over. Every month, I paid those bills from my own account, quietly, without complaint, without thanks. They had the house, but I still kept the lights on. And now, standing in a room full of laughter that had nothing to do with me, surrounded by strangers who thought I was a stranger too, I finally saw it for what it was. This was not my home, but it was not fully theirs either. Not yet. Not if I did not let it be. It started with a photo. I was scrolling through Facebook on the old iPad my grandson used to play games on. I did not check it often. My eyes were not what they used to be, and most days I was too tired. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe a need to feel connected, made me open it that morning. My daughter-in-law had posted Christmas photos, the kind with bright filters, coordinated outfits, and perfectly arranged smiles. I tapped one with my crooked finger and waited for it to load. There they were, my son, my grandson, and her, posed in front of the fireplace. The stockings I had sewn by hand years ago were still hanging. The tree behind them was lit with warm white lights, and the floor was scattered with gift boxes, wrapped in paper I had bought. And yet, I was not in the photo. That made sense at first. After all, I had not been allowed in the house that morning. I was in the container. But then I scrolled further. There were pictures from Thanksgiving, from the summer barbecue, even from my grandson's birthday party last March, all posted publicly. Dozens of photos. Not a single one had me in it. Even the ones I remembered being part of, where I had stood behind the cake or handed over the candles, had been cropped. You could still see the edge of my cardigan or the tip of my hand, but never my face, never my name. One caption read, "Just us, our little family, so grateful, just us." I zoomed in, scanning each image like I was looking for evidence in a crime scene. And that is how it felt, like I had been erased. Not ignored, not forgotten, deliberately erased. I clicked on her albums. Years' worth of photos. Not a single birthday card I had written. Not a single mention of the woman who paid the mortgage for 3 years while they got on their feet. I clicked back to my own profile. I had 6 friends, most of them inactive. My last post was from 2 years ago, a photo of my grandson in a Halloween costume. It had 1 like, mine. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because something inside me broke, quietly, without noise. Later that evening, I decided to ask. I called my son while he was driving. I could hear traffic in the background, the blinker ticking. "David," I said gently, "I noticed something on Facebook." A pause. "What about it?" "Well, I just saw the photos from Christmas, and I wondered why I wasn't in any of them." Silence. Then laughter, but not the kind that warms, the kind that makes you feel foolish. "Mom," he said, "it's just Facebook. It's not real life." But I was in some of those moments. "You remember at the birthday party?" "Mom," he interrupted, voice turning sharp. "Social media is a space for curated content. You wouldn't understand. It's for our generation. You don't need to be in everything." "I'm not asking to be in everything," I said, a little quieter now. "Just, I didn't expect to be erased." Another pause. Then, flatly, "Mom, the internet's not for you. Please don't make this a thing. Just stay off Facebook. It's better." He hung up before I could say another word. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear even after the call had ended. The words swirled around in my head like a cold wind. "It's not for you. You wouldn't understand. Stay off." I was not angry, not yet. Anger needs oxygen. I was weightless, unanchored, like a photograph that had fallen behind a cabinet, collecting dust. That night, I lay in the container again, wrapped in every blanket I had. My fingers were stiff from the cold. I stared at the ceiling, lit dimly by the spill of porch light through the slats. I thought about what it meant to be invisible, not just in a house, but in memory, in record, in history. What do you call a life that has no witness, a love that leaves no evidence? I began to remember other things, other moments that had seemed small at the time but now formed a pattern. How my name was no longer on the emergency contact list at my grandson's school. How the family Christmas cards stopped arriving in envelopes addressed to me and instead went to the Johnson family, as if I were a boarder or a ghost. How the neighbor once asked if I still lived there, and my daughter-in-law had said, temporarily, just until she finds a place. And yet this house had my name on it. My signature in ink on closing day, my sweat in the walls and the attic and the garden soil, my money in the down payment. I realized something then. They had erased me from photos, from posts, from narratives, but not from paper. Not from the deed, not from the utility bills, not from the bank records. On those documents I was not invisible. I was very, very real. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to remind them of that. I never imagined I would become the kind of person who hides things. But desperation has a way of rewriting your morals in icy ink. It began one evening, after another meal where I sat at the edge of silence. The roasted turkey smelled incredible, but I had no appetite. My daughter-in-law passed me the gravy with a tight smile, as though she were offering medicine to a patient she had already decided to discharge. After the guests left and the dishes were done, I lingered in the kitchen. The overhead lights were warm, but I felt like I was in a place far colder. That's when I noticed it. A small security camera tucked under the upper cabinet, angled toward the center of the room. It was subtle enough to blend in, but I knew what cameras looked like. I had worked in a hospital once, back when I was a nurse, and we had cameras in the ward. My breath caught. I wasn't a fool. They had installed a camera so they could record me, probably thinking I was too old to figure it out. I stood there, heart pounding. Then, with shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and played back the app they had connected. There it was, live feed of the kitchen. My kitchen. My house. The next days passed in a blur. Anxiety sharpened every sound. I found myself whispering into empty rooms just to test if anyone was listening. I downloaded the app and began reviewing hours of footage. I felt sick at what I saw. There was the day my daughter-in-law muttered, loud enough for even her mouth to frame the words but low enough that guests remained polite. She is completely useless. She never cleans right, never cooks right. She just sits and breathes, taking up space. Seconds later, condescending laughter. There was a clip of my son in the living room with his office buddies, talking about the old woman who still thinks she owns this place. I mean, she signed over 51%, but come on. We run the joint. She doesn't even know how to turn on the oven. They laughed at that. Then, back in the kitchen, one evening after a fight about the thermostat, Mom's energy bill last month was through the roof. We have to pay it ourselves, she told him. He shrugged. She does not contribute. She sighed. That woman is a parasite. The word stung worse than the cold. And there it was, too, a clip I recorded the same night I was shoved into the container. Her voice, clipped and clinical. I swear, if she'd just died already, we'd be better off. Merry Christmas. I paused the playback. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set the phone on the counter and clutch the edges to steady myself. That night, I went upstairs and found the old USB drive I used to back up my recipes and family photos. With a smile that felt morally ambiguous, I plugged it into the app and left tablet they had left downstairs. I selected clips. The parasite clip, the die already clip, the bits where my name was mocked, the dismissive laughter. I labeled them clearly: Emily Johnson, harassment, and audio proof contempt. I added the security footage showing them mocking me when they thought no one was listening. Then, quietly, mind trembling but heart resolute, I downloaded the evidence. I drove across Lansing to a small law office downtown, where I had once volunteered to help staff flu clinics. The secretary remembered me and offered coffee, but I only needed water. I told the lawyer what was in the drive, and his eyes widened. Mrs. Johnson, this is substantial. Defamation, emotional abuse. If your name is still on the deed, we can leverage this. I nodded. I handed him the drive, and he placed it into an envelope marked confidential. Before I left, I asked, "Can I call them, the Johnsons?" He paused. It's better if you let us proceed. If there's a press release, it will be done professionally. But yes, you should prepare for them to react. Outside, the winter wind slapped my car. I clutched the steering wheel. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not wealth, not victory, but the rare, refined power of truth in your hands. The next move came that afternoon. I sat in my tiny living room with the blinds drawn. My hands rested on a handwritten note to an old student, the one who became a journalist at WXYZ Detroit. I had called her weeks ago and she had promised to stay in touch. Now I pressed send. It was short. "Lisa, thank you. I am ready when you are." And I waited. By nightfall I had a response. "Meet me tomorrow morning. I have questions." I did not sleep well. I lay awake in my bedroom, the same one I had shared with my husband, feeling like a stranger. The winds rattled the window, but I welcomed the cold. For the first time, the chill didn't pierce me. It felt like anticipation. I folded the blanket neatly around me. The container was warm once more. I closed my eyes, thinking of tomorrow. Tomorrow, I would stop being invisible. I sat across from my lawyer in a small office with laminate floors and windows that faced the parking lot. The walls were bare except for a calendar with photos of bald eagles. Fitting, I thought. Even eagles wait until their wings heal before they dive. "We're going to file for partition," Mr. Reynolds said, tapping the edge of the folder I had handed him. "Michigan law allows it. You own 49% of the property, they own 51%. But if co-owners can't agree on how the property is used, the court can force a sale." I nodded. I had already made my decision. The recordings, the treatment, the Christmas banishment, it was all fuel, but the foundation was legal, and that was what mattered now. He flipped through the papers, copies of the deed, utility bills with my name, and the USB drive. "What they did to you," he said, "might not get them arrested, but it will absolutely get them evicted." I smiled, not with joy, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had waited long enough. We filed the petition that day. It was called Request for Partition Due to Irreconcilable Use Agreement, a long formal phrase for something very simple. They could not pretend I did not exist if my name was still on the house. A week later, I got the email. The court had accepted our filing. A date was set. The Johnsons would receive notice in 3 days. That evening, I received a message from Lisa, the journalist, my former student. "Is it okay if we run the story this weekend? We'll anonymize the names for now unless you say otherwise." I called her instead of texting. I wanted her to hear my voice. "Use my name," I said, "and use theirs." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I am too old to stay invisible," she laughed softly, respectfully. "All right, Mrs. Johnson, let's show them." The piece aired on Sunday evening. XWAG Detroit, a segment just before the weather. The anchor, a clean-cut man in a blue suit, looked directly into the camera. Tonight, a story from right here in Michigan about a grandmother who spent Christmas Eve not by the fire, but in a steel storage container in her own backyard, and how she decided not to stay silent. They ran the photos, ones Lisa had asked me for. One from the 1980s, me holding my son at his first birthday. One from our first winter in the house, snow piled high against the windows. My husband, still alive then, smiling beside me. Then came the voiceover. Keep her decades of sacrifice, she helped her son buy a home. She gave him the deed, with a small clause. Her name remained on 49% of the ownership. She paid the bills, she repaired the furnace. She was the one who called the plumber after the basement flooded. A pause. But last Christmas, she was told to stay out of sight, told her presence embarrassed them. Her grandson didn't even know her name. They played the recording, just a few seconds. My daughter-in-law's voice, "God, I wish she'd just die already." The news anchor returned, face serious. But she didn't. She documented. She filed. And now, a Michigan court may order the sale of the home she helped build, a legal reminder that silence is not surrender. That night, I turned off the TV and sat in silence. I expected phone calls. I got them. A neighbor called first. "I had no idea, Mary. I'm so sorry." Then a cousin. "I saw the broadcast. You always were stronger than people thought. And then, 3 hours later, the call came from my son. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was strained. "Mom, please. We didn't know it would go this far. Can we talk? Just call me." I deleted the message. The next day, the house was quiet. My daughter-in-law didn't go to her yoga class. My son worked from home. I watched from the sidewalk across the street as the news van packed up. They were polite, professional, but their presence lingered like a scar. On Tuesday, a notice was delivered, official court summons. By Friday, a printed copy of the WXYZ headline was taped to the Johnsons' mailbox. I did not put it there. I suspect a neighbor did, or maybe a grocery clerk who'd recognized them. I didn't ask. Instead, I drove to the county office and requested an updated copy of the utility records. The gas, water, and electric bills were still in my name, every single one. Mr. Reynolds smiled when I handed them over. "This strengthens your position. You are more than a legal co-owner. You are the financial backbone." We included those in the court file. The final blow, the one that even I had not anticipated, came from the bank. Turns out, when I had helped my son with the initial mortgage, I had also co-signed the loan. That meant, technically, my credit was on the line, and my consent was needed for any refinancing. They had tried to refinance without telling me, twice. Both times it had been denied, and now I had proof. My lawyer's assistant called it a glorious mess of their own making. I just called it justice. That weekend, Lisa emailed me the full article. It was online now, not just TV. Title, "The Grandma Who Took Back Her House, One Document at a Time." The comments poured in. One read, "She's a hero. Quiet vengeance is the most poetic." Another, "This is why you don't mess with women who survived the Great Recession and 3 decades of PTA." I laughed. Truly laughed. For the first time in months. Not because I had won, but because I had reminded the world and myself that I was never someone to dismiss. Not in court, not on paper, and certainly not in my own damn home. It started slowly. First, a neighbor across the street stopped waving at my son when he took the trash out. Then the woman next door, who used to exchange garden clippings with my daughter-in-law, posted a subtle quote on her Facebook. "Honor thy mother, or one day you'll be praying outside a courtroom." I smiled when I saw it. She had been at our 4th of July cookout 3 years ago. Quiet woman, smart eyes. By the end of the week, word had spread through our Lansing neighborhood like a winter wind under an unsealed window. Everyone had seen the story. The woman in the container, the quiet lawsuit, the taped recordings. At first, I thought it might blow over, but I underestimated the Michigan grapevine. The morning after the story aired, a sheet of printer paper had been duct taped to the Johnsons' front fence. In bold block letters it read, "A family that hides their mother will lose their home." It was gone by noon, but not before 5 neighbors saw it. One of them took a photo and sent it to me with a heart emoji. I didn't reply, but I saved the image. I let the pressure build. Then I made the call. A real estate agent named Sharon came over 2 days later. She was practical, efficient, and wore snow boots with her power suit. I liked her immediately. "This is an unusual listing," she said, reviewing the paperwork. "You own 49%, and they can't buy you out? They do not want to. And I no longer care." She looked at me over her glasses. "You want to sell your share publicly?" I nodded. Sharon's assistant came out the next morning to measure the lot, take photos of the siding, and confirm that yes, the backyard container was still locked shut. It was rusting now. Fitting. By Friday afternoon, a large white and blue sign was staked into the snowy front lawn. "For sale, due to co-owner disagreement." Infuriated with agent. My daughter-in-law came home just as they were hammering it in. I watched from across the street. She parked, stepped out, saw the sign, and froze. She ran to the front porch, fumbled with her keys, and slammed the door behind her. Within the hour, my son called. This time, I picked up. "Mom," he said, voice shaky, "can we meet? Please?" I agreed. We met at a cafe halfway between our houses. Neutral ground. He looked like a boy again, sitting there with his coat unzipped and his hands stuffed between his knees. Not the man who once called me forgettable behind my back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, eyes red. "You always said this house was our home, that you wanted it to stay in the family." "I did," I said, stirring my tea. "But you stopped treating it and me like part of the family." He rubbed his eyes. "It was never meant to go that far." I set my cup down. "You locked your mother in a container." He went quiet. I leaned forward. "You erased me from pictures, from your child's life. You let your wife say things I would not repeat in church, and you said nothing." He looked down at his lap. "But now that it's on TV," I continued, "now that your neighbors are whispering, now you care." He whispered, "I am sorry." "Good," I said, "but sorry does not change deeds, legal or emotional." Back at the house, the sign remained. Neighbors began slowing down as they walked their dogs. One woman took a selfie with the sign behind her and captioned it, "Accountability looks good," in blue. I started receiving baked goods, banana bread, a tin of cookies, even a casserole with a sticky note. "You taught my daughter in 1984. She says you were the reason she went to college." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had never felt more visible. A few days later, my daughter-in-law showed up at my doorstep. Not their doorstep, mine. It was dusk. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were swollen. She held a baby blanket in her hands, the one I had knitted when my grandson was born. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I didn't answer immediately. I looked down at the blanket, then back up at her. She said, "I don't want your share of the house. I don't want anything. I want you to call off the sale." "Because of the neighbors?" I asked. She shook her head. "Because I am ashamed. And because I forgot what kind of woman you are." She stepped forward, offering me the blanket. I took it, not because I forgave her, but because I had made it with love. And love, even neglected, still had weight. "I do not hate you," I said. "But this house is not a reward anymore. It is a mirror, and I will not spend another year looking into it and seeing nothing looking back." She bit her lip. "Is there anything we can do?" I stepped back and gently shut the door. Not a slam, just a close. That night I stood on the porch and looked at the sign. My name was in bold letters under co-owner. For the first time, it felt like more than just a line on a deed. It felt like justice finally had my handwriting. And I slept that night without locking the door, because there was nothing left to fear. New Year's Eve. Snow drifted softly across the Michigan yard, settling like memory over every frozen blade of grass. I returned to the house, not to be welcomed, but to finish what I had started. I did not knock. I used the same key I had never handed over, the one I kept on a chain around my neck beside a worn St. Christopher medal. I turned the knob slowly and walked in like I used to, like it was mine, because it still was. Inside, they were scrambling. Papers were strewn across the dining table, toy trucks half-packed into bins, blankets rolled but forgotten. My son's face was pale. My daughter-in-law looked like someone who had just remembered too late that actions have consequences. She rushed to me, hands trembling, grabbing mine as if the same fingers she once ignored now held salvation. "Mom, please. I was wrong. I know. Whatever you want. Just don't sell the house. We have nowhere else to go." I gently pulled my hand away, not with anger, not with cruelty, with finality. The way a teacher closes a gradebook on the last day of school. My son stepped forward. His eyes were swollen, red at the corners. "Mom, if you do this, we lose everything. This is where we're raising our son. This is his home, your grandson's home." I stayed quiet for a long moment. Then I looked at the wall behind him. A picture frame hung slightly crooked, one of the few they had not packed. It was a photo of him at age 8, holding a tray of butter cookies I had baked for his school party. He had been missing his 2 front teeth. The smile was wide, unfiltered, unashamed. I unzipped my bag and pulled out a small wooden box. I placed it on the coffee table between us and opened it slowly. Inside was the original copy of that same photo, creased, yellowed with age, edges curled like petals from years of handling. The date was scribbled on the back in my handwriting, December 1993. I looked at him, not with resentment, but with clarity. "You used to smile because your mother made you cookies," I said. "Now, your mother smiles because you no longer have a place to eat them." My daughter-in-law collapsed onto the couch, her sobs filling the corners of the room. My son stood still, paralyzed between guilt and disbelief. I turned. No need for a hug. No need for a holiday greeting. No need for words that had long ago lost their meaning. At the doorway, I paused. I used to be silent just to keep this house together. But you taught me something I never knew. I looked back once, only once. Silence doesn't earn love. It erases you, and then I closed the door behind me. This time, it was not the door of a family home. It was the door of a quiet freedom, long delayed, but finally and rightfully mine. If this story reminded you of someone, a mother, a grandmother, or maybe yourself, do not let it fade into silence, because silence does not protect us, it buries us. And sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is remember everything and speak. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe wisdom has no expiration date, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where silence ends and truth begins.